What if the world we call ancient is not ancient at all? What if civilization did not begin where our history books tell us it did, but restarted there after something vast, advanced, and global was erased? Every culture remembers a beginning. But what they remember even more clearly is an ending. The earliest stories humanity ever told do not open with creation. They open with destruction. Not the end of a city. Not the fall of a kingdom. But the collapse of an entire world. Across continents that should never have shared ideas, ancient traditions speak of the same impossible event. A time when oceans rose without warning. When the sky darkened. When the land itself seemed to turn against those who lived upon it. These stories do not describe gradual decline. They describe sudden disappearance. A reset. Archaeologists often call these similarities coincidence. Historians call them metaphor. Skeptics dismiss them as imagination shaped by fear. Yet the details refuse to disappear. From the Americas to Mesopotamia, from India to Egypt, cultures separated by oceans and thousands of years describe the same thing, a forgotten age that ended violently, a knowledge that somehow survived. Not buildings. Not machines. But understanding. This is where the story becomes uncomfortable. Because if these civilizations were merely primitive, how could they remember something so vast? And if they were advanced, why does history begin only after their destruction? It is almost as if the first chapter of humanity's story has been deliberately removed. Long before writing, before kings, before borders, humanity told stories not to entertain, but to preserve memory. These stories were never meant to be literal in the modern sense. They were containers. Vessels designed to carry information across generations that might otherwise forget everything. And what they carried was not a warning of gods, but a record of cycles. Ancient traditions describe time not as a straight line, but as a rhythm. Civilizations rise, reach a peak, lose balance, and collapse. Then the world resets itself. Not out of cruelty, but necessity. When balance is broken, the planet corrects. Floods. Fire. Ice. Different mechanisms, same outcome. What follows is always the same silence. And yet, something always remains. A teaching. A principle. A memory that refuses to die. This is not mythology behaving randomly. This is mythology behaving systematically. There is a problem historians rarely address directly. Why do ancient cultures agree on events they should not agree on? Why do flood stories describe similar timelines? Why do they speak of lost lands, advanced knowledge, and teachers who appear after catastrophe? Why do they insist that wisdom did not originate with humans, but was inherited? The answer usually given is shared archetypes. But archetypes do not explain precision. They do not explain why symbols repeat in places that had no contact. They do not explain why identical phrases appear in different languages centuries apart. They do not explain why certain ideas vanish and then return. Unless those ideas were never lost. Unless they were carried forward intentionally. Among all remnants of forgotten knowledge, one object, or perhaps one idea, stands above the rest. It appears in Egyptian inscriptions. It surfaces in Greek philosophy. It re-emerges in Arabic manuscripts. It haunts medieval Europe. And every time it appears, it carries the same message. The structure of reality is knowable. Not through faith. Not through worship. But through understanding. The object is described differently across eras. Some call it a stone. Others a plate. Others a tablet. Almost all agree on one detail. It is green. Not painted green. Not decorated. Green as if the material itself does not belong to this world. And carved upon it, symbols that do not behave like language. They shift. They reflect. They reveal meaning only to those prepared to understand it. This is what later generations would call the Emerald Tablet. But the oldest traditions do not describe it as an invention. They describe it as an inheritance. Here is where modern thinking begins to fail. Ancient writers could not agree on how many emerald tablets existed. Some say 1. Some say 7. Some say it could divide itself and still remain whole. To a modern mind, this sounds absurd. To an ancient mind, it made perfect sense. Because they were not describing an object. They were describing a pattern. A system of knowledge capable of reproducing itself across ages, cultures, and minds. A blueprint that could survive the death of civilizations because it was not tied to a single place or form. If this is true, then humanity has been asking the wrong question. Not where is the emerald tablet, but how does it move through time? Every civilization that speaks of the tablet also speaks of a figure. A teacher. A keeper of cycles. A being who survives catastrophe not by chance, but by design. His name changes depending on the culture. But his role never does. He appears after the world collapses. He teaches astronomy, writing, measurement, law. He never rules. He never demands worship. And when his work is done, he disappears. Some call him a god. Others call him a sage. A few describe him as something in between. The Egyptians would later know him as Thoth. But this is not where his story begins. This is simply where it intersects with ours. Long before Egypt, long before cities, long before humanity believed itself alone in understanding the universe, there were traditions that spoke of beings who measured time in cycles lasting thousands of years. They believed consciousness did not originate in the body. That civilizations were temporary expressions of something far older. That when one world ended, memory had to be carried into the next. Not by books. Not by monuments. But by those who could remember. These beings were said to encode knowledge into patterns, geometry, symbols, alignments, that could survive floods and fire. What later generations would call magic was, to them, simply science misunderstood by a younger world. And at the center of this tradition stood the emerald tablet. Not as a relic, but as a key. The oldest myths say the tablet does not appear randomly. It appears when humanity reaches a threshold. A moment when knowledge must either be preserved or lost completely. It disappears when the world is not ready, and re-emerges when the cycle turns again. Which leads to an unsettling possibility. If the emerald tablet keeps returning, what does that say about the age we are living in now? And more importantly, what happened in the age that came before ours? Because according to the oldest records, the civilization that first carried this knowledge was not Egypt, not Greece, not Sumer. It was a world so advanced, so structured, and so dangerous to forget, that when it fell, the planet itself erased it. And the name given to that lost world was Atlantis. Atlantis is often treated as a fantasy, a moral tale invented by philosophers, a metaphor for human arrogance, a cautionary story about pride and downfall. But the oldest accounts do not describe Atlantis as a lesson. They describe it as a memory. Not a single city. Not an empire in the modern sense. But a system, an arrangement of knowledge spread across a vast and deliberate design. According to the earliest traditions, Atlantis was never meant to last forever. It was part of a cycle. The ancient texts speak of Atlantis as a constellation of 10 regions, arranged not by political borders, but by function. Each region existed for a specific purpose, contributing to the stability of the whole. One studied the movement of the stars. One mapped the deep currents of the oceans. One worked with metals no longer known to humanity. They describe the eternal fire as real. And more importantly, they describe it as dangerous. Thoth was not born human in the way we understand humanity now. He was trained. From an early stage, he displayed a capacity that even the children of light did not expect. He did not simply learn knowledge, he perceived patterns. He did not memorize cycles, he felt when they were turning. While others studied the eternal fire as a resource, Thoth understood it as a state. A condition of awareness. Through it, he sensed something unsettling. The rhythm of the world was shifting. Atlantis was not falling apart. There were no wars tearing it down. No famine breaking its people. No internal collapse. It was thriving. Its cities were illuminated at night. Its archives were full. Its ships traveled across oceans with ease. And yet, beneath the stability, the children of light detected a pressure building within the planet itself. A force accumulating not from human action, but from the deep mechanics of the earth. Some described it as a flood. Others as darkness. Others as a cleansing. But all agreed on one thing. Atlantis would not survive it. This is the question that haunts the story. If Atlantis was so advanced, why did it not save itself? The answer appears in a fragment preserved far from the ruins of that world. It states simply, no cycle can be stopped once it begins. The earth resets itself to preserve balance. No civilization, no matter how advanced, is exempt. Not even Atlantis. Thoth understood this. And instead of fighting the inevitable, he prepared for something else. Thoth did not attempt to preserve cities. He prepared to preserve memory. He gathered those who could carry specific disciplines into the next age. Not armies. Not rulers. Teachers. One who understood the stars. One who understood the earth's rhythms. One who preserved lost sciences. And Thoth himself, who carried the pattern that connected them all. This is where the legends diverge, but only slightly. Some say Thoth carried a tablet. Some say several. Some say nothing physical at all. But all agree on this. He carried something capable of outliving a world. Atlantis did not collapse slowly. It ended in a moment. The sea surged. The sky darkened. The land fractured. 10 regions vanished beneath water that carried away not just structures, but memory itself. Humanity would forget this world ever existed. But Thoth did not look back. His task was not to mourn. It was to plant the seed of remembrance in the next age. Because the story does not end with Atlantis sinking. It begins when Thoth steps out of a drowned world and into a land marked long ago as humanity's next awakening. A land that would one day be called Egypt. Excellent. When Atlantis disappeared beneath the waves, there were no witnesses left to record its fall. No surviving towers. No broken walls rising from the sea. No human voices to remember what had been lost. History began again in silence. And yet, something moved through that silence. Not a survivor clinging to wreckage. Not a refugee fleeing disaster. But a figure who had already stepped into the future before the past was erased. Thoth did not escape Atlantis. He departed it. The ancient traditions are careful with their words when they describe Thoth after the flood. They do not say he survived by luck. They do not say he endured by chance. They say he passed through. To him, the destruction of Atlantis was not an ending, it was a transition. One phase of a cycle closing so another could begin. A process he had studied across lifetimes. How many lifetimes? The sources do not agree. Some say he lived through 6 cycles of humanity. Some say 12. Others insist he was born between ages and therefore belonged fully to none of them. But all accounts agree on one detail. Thoth remembered what the world forgot. This question has followed his name for thousands of years. Was he human, elevated by knowledge? Was he one of the children of light? Or was he something else entirely? The stories never answer directly. Instead, they describe abilities that do not sit comfortably in human history. They say his mind did not forget. They say his body aged only when he allowed it to. They say he could leave one form and return in another without losing continuity. These descriptions echo the children of light, but Thoth is always described as different. Where they guarded knowledge, he carried purpose. After the flood, the world was unrecognizable. Coastlines had shifted. Mountains had cracked. Rivers carved new paths across scarred land. Human tribes wandered through the aftermath, unaware they were walking on the bones of a forgotten age. Language had fractured. Memory had collapsed. Knowledge had been scattered like ash. Thoth traveled through this broken world with a small group of teachers, each chosen for a reason. One carried the memory of the stars. One held the cycles of the earth. One preserved sciences that would later be mistaken for magic. And Thoth carried something none of them fully understood. The object, or principle, Thoth carried is described with unusual restraint. Some texts call it a tablet. Others a plate. Others a living stone. All agree it behaved unlike anything humans had created. Its surface shifted under light. Its symbols rearranged themselves. Its meaning changed depending on the mind that approached it. The knowledge it contained was not freely given. It tested the one who sought to read it. Approach with fear, and it became unreadable. Approach with pride, and it grew heavy. Approach with balance, and fragments of understanding emerged. This was the Emerald Tablet, not as a book, but as a threshold. Thoth understood something that later ages would forget. Knowledge delivered too early can destroy as easily as it can elevate. Humanity after the flood was fragile. It was rebuilding instinct before understanding. To reveal the full structure of reality at once would fracture societies that had barely survived extinction. So Thoth chose a different path. He would not reveal the tablet. He would embed it. Long before the flood, Atlantean star maps marked a region called chemistry. Not as a destination of power, but as a seed. A land that would survive the reset. A land whose people carried fragments of older memory in instinct and ritual. A land positioned beneath stars whose cycles mirrored those of the earth itself. Chemistry was not yet Egypt. It was raw. Unformed. Waiting. Thoth moved toward it deliberately. The legends describe Thoth's arrival with no spectacle. No fire from the sky. No voice from the heavens. He walked into the valley as a traveler. Yet the land reacted. Wind softened. The horizon shimmered. The people felt something before they saw anything. They did not recognize him consciously. They remembered him. The tribes of chemistry spoke of sky beings, boat travelers, teachers who once crossed the heavens. These were fragments of Atlantean memory, distorted but not erased. Thoth did not claim authority over them. He watched. He observed how they built shelters aligned to stars they could not name. How they buried their dead according to patterns older than their language. How instinct guided what memory could not. Then he began to teach. Not doctrine. Not belief. Measurement. He showed them how to track shadows. How to count lunar cycles. How to align stone with rising stars. These lessons seemed simple. Their consequences were not. As the people of chemistry learned, something shifted. Their rituals gained structure. Their calendars gained precision. Their settlements grew around points of celestial alignment. They were not becoming something new. They were remembering something old. Questions followed. How old is the Earth? Why do civilizations rise and fall? What force destroys worlds? Thoth answered carefully. He spoke of cycles, but not Atlantis. He spoke of destruction, but not the eternal fire. He spoke of balance, but not the tablet. Because the age was not ready. Thoth gathered students, not for power, but for memory. He taught them geometry that would one day become sacred architecture. He taught them proportions that reflected cosmic harmony. He taught them to listen to silence. And into these teachings, he wove the Emerald Tablet. Not as text, but as structure. Into angles. Into ratios. Into alignments that would survive flood, fire, and forgetting. The tablet was no longer an object. It was a pattern encoded into the world. Legends whisper of strange phenomena during this time. A faint green glow seen near Thoth's dwelling. Symbols that seemed to move when unobserved. A night when the valley shone as if touched by a forgotten sun. Official histories remain silent. Oral traditions do not. They suggest the tablet was responding. The world was waking. Thoth knew his role in this form was temporary. The cycle of rebirth was not a gift, it was responsibility. Before leaving, he planted one final idea in his students. A promise. That when the world reached another turning point, the tablet would return. Not to kings. Not to empires. But to those who could hear the echo of forgotten ages. Then he disappeared. Not in death, but in transition. Because Thoth did not vanish forever. He would return under another name. In another land. At another turning of the cycle. And when he did, the knowledge of Atlantis would surface again. This time in Greece. Where Thoth would be remembered as Hermes Trismegistus. And the Emerald Tablet would begin its most dangerous journey yet. Civilizations forget names. They forget faces. They forget places. But they do not forget patterns. And when the cycle turned again, the pattern returned. Thoth did not disappear from history. He transformed within it. Centuries after Thoth vanished from Egypt, whispers began to spread across the Mediterranean. Stories of a figure who appeared suddenly among scholars, priests, and seekers. He did not arrive as a conqueror. He did not rule cities. He did not claim divinity. Yet wherever he appeared, something changed. Ideas sharpened. Questions deepened. Reality itself felt more structured. The Greeks called him Hermes Trismegistus. Hermes, the messenger. Trismegistus, the thrice great. Great in mind. Great in word. Great in understanding of the cosmos. Later generations would turn Hermes into a god. But the earliest sources hesitate. They describe him as a teacher who remembered too much. He spoke of the universe not as chaos, but as architecture. He spoke of nature not as random, but as lawful. He spoke of the human mind not as separate from reality, but as a reflection of it. This alone made him dangerous. Because a civilization built on such ideas cannot be controlled easily. Hermes taught principles that should not have existed yet. He explained how the movement of stars shaped events on Earth. How numbers governed harmony. How consciousness interacted with matter. To the Greeks, this was revolutionary. To Hermes, it was memory. From Hermes came writings that would later be known as the Hermetica. They were not religious texts. They were not philosophical debates. They were instructions for understanding reality. They spoke of the unity of all things, the correspondence between inner and outer worlds, transformation as a natural law. And at the center of these teachings appeared a phrase that would echo for thousands of years. As above, so below. As within, so without. To modern ears, the phrase sounds poetic. To ancient minds, it was explosive. It suggested that the universe is mirrored in the human mind, that the smallest particle reflects the largest structure, that consciousness is not passive, it participates. This was not mythology. This was a framework. And frameworks shape civilizations. Greek accounts speak of a green stone connected to Hermes. Some say it was found beneath a statue. Others say it was discovered in a cave. Others say it was never found, but revealed itself. Its surface reflected light unnaturally. Its symbols shifted with perspective. Its meaning resisted translation. Hermes warned that words could only imitate its truth, not contain it. This was the Emerald Tablet. Not newly created. Inherited. Greece was not powerful at the time. It was fragmented. Curious. Philosophically hungry. Perfect conditions for planting ideas that would grow beyond their origin. Hermes did not give the Greeks technology. He gave them questions. And questions reshaped worlds. But something changed. As the teachings spread, interpretations fractured. Some saw the knowledge as spiritual. Others as scientific. Others as a path to power. Hermes understood the risk. Knowledge without balance leads to collapse. Once again, the pattern repeated. Just as in Egypt, Hermes did not stay. When his teachings reached critical mass, he disappeared. No grave. No record of death. Only texts. Fragments. And a tablet no one could fully claim to possess. Because Hermes did not vanish into silence. His teachings traveled east and south, into Arabia, into Alexandria, into the hidden vaults of scholars who would risk their lives to preserve forbidden knowledge. And there, the emerald tablet would begin to transform from wisdom into obsession. When Hermes vanished from Greece, his teachings did not vanish with him. They migrated. Quietly. Deliberately. Along paths that power rarely notices, until it is too late. There was once a city designed not for conquest, but for understanding. Alexandria. A place where Greek logic, Egyptian memory, Persian astronomy, and Eastern philosophy collided. Scholars gathered there not to worship gods, but to question reality itself. At the heart of this city stood the library. Not merely a building. A machine for preserving memory. And within its vast archives, the teachings attributed to Hermes found fertile ground. Something important happened in Alexandria. For the first time, seekers stopped treating knowledge as information and began treating it as transformation. Hermetic teachings suggested that understanding reality was not enough. One had to align with it. The universe, they believed, was alive. Structured. Responsive. And if a human mind could attune itself to those structures, reality would respond in return. This was no longer philosophy. This was initiation. In Alexandrian texts, the emerald tablet is no longer just mentioned. It is referenced indirectly. Writers speak of a source text that could not be copied directly, a teaching so precise that translation would distort it, a structure of knowledge that resisted permanence. Instead of reproducing it, scholars encoded it, in allegory, in symbols, in diagrams meant only for those trained to see them. The tablet was becoming something else. Not an object to be found. A system to be entered. This was not secrecy born of arrogance. It was necessity. The Hermetic scholars understood something brutal: knowledge is neutral. Humans are not. Give power without wisdom, and civilization fractures. Give understanding without restraint, and it becomes domination. So they concealed. They spoke in riddles not to mystify, but to protect. Only those willing to dedicate years, sometimes lifetimes, to study could even begin to approach the truth. This is why later generations misunderstood alchemy. The popular image of alchemy is deeply misleading. Early alchemists were not treasure hunters. They were engineers of transformation. They believed all matter existed in stages of refinement. That metals, like consciousness, could be purified, elevated, perfected. Gold was not the goal. Gold was the symbol of completion. At the heart of alchemy stood the great work. A process meant to mirror the structure of the universe itself. Every alchemical tradition speaks of it. A substance capable of perfecting matter, healing the body, extending life, awakening perception. To outsiders, it sounded absurd. To insiders, it was a blueprint, directly derived from the emerald tablet. The stone represented the unity of opposites. Above and below. Spirit and matter. Observer and observed. But here is the crucial detail most people miss. The stone was never meant for everyone. As Hermetic knowledge spread beyond Alexandria, something changed. The teachings left the hands of initiates and entered the ambitions of rulers. Kings heard whispers of gold. Courts funded laboratories. Power sought shortcuts. And the balance was lost. Where earlier alchemists had spent decades refining understanding, new seekers demanded results. The system responded poorly. Accounts from this era become disturbing. Alchemists reporting symbols that moved. Substances that glowed without heat. Visions during long experiments. A sense that the work itself was watching the practitioner. Some dismissed these as hallucinations. Others believed they were signs of progress. But one pattern repeats across cultures. The deeper the attempt to force transformation, the more unstable the seeker became. This is where Hermetic texts grow cautious. They warn that the great work cannot be rushed. That forcing transformation causes collapse of mind, of body, of society. The Emerald Tablet, they insist, does not reward ambition. It reflects the state of the observer. Those who sought power found confusion. Those who sought wealth found ruin. Those who sought understanding found fragments, never the whole. And then, the unthinkable happened. The library burned. Not once. Not in a single event. But repeatedly, across centuries, until almost nothing remained. Scrolls vanished. Diagrams turned to ash. Lineages broke. Official history treats this as tragedy. Hermetic tradition treats it as inevitability. The age was no longer balanced. After Alexandria, the teachings did not disappear. They retreated into monasteries, private collections, oral traditions, encoded manuscripts. The Emerald Tablet survived not as an object, but as an echo. Its message resurfaced wherever seekers were willing to look beyond appearances. While Europe descended into fragmentation, something remarkable occurred elsewhere. In the Islamic world, scholars preserved Greek and Hermetic texts with care. They translated, studied, and expanded them. It is here that the Emerald Tablet's words appear again, this time in Arabic manuscripts attributed to Balinas, believed by many to be another echo of Hermes. The phrase remained unchanged. As above, so below. Not poetry. Instruction. This persistence raises a troubling question. Why does this knowledge refuse to vanish? Empires collapse. Languages die. Religions rise and fall. Yet the core structure of the Emerald Tablet survives every age. Unless it was designed to. Unless it was never meant to belong to a single civilization. Unless it was meant to wait. Because the more the world tried to suppress this knowledge, the more desperately others tried to possess it. And in medieval Europe, the search for the Emerald Tablet would transform from preservation into obsession. An obsession that would draw in secret orders, forbidden experiments, and one of the greatest scientific minds in history. By the time medieval Europe inherited fragments of Hermetic knowledge, the world had changed. Faith ruled. Authority hardened. Curiosity became dangerous. And yet, beneath monasteries, inside private studies, and within secret gatherings, the same question refused to die. What did the Emerald Tablet truly contain? Earlier ages had treated Hermetic knowledge as something to be guarded. Medieval Europe treated it as something to be seized. The meaning shifted subtly, but fatally. No longer was the Emerald Tablet approached as a system of balance. It became a rumored source of power. A key to wealth, longevity, and influence. Kings funded laboratories. Nobles protected alchemists. The church watched carefully and condemned quickly. Alchemy went underground. As public study became dangerous, knowledge reorganized itself. Groups emerged that did not advertise their existence. They spoke in symbols, gestures, coded diagrams. Membership was selective. Initiation was slow. Later generations would give them names: Rosicrucians, Templar offshoots, early Masonic traditions. Whether these groups truly possessed deeper knowledge or merely believed they did remains debated. But one thing is certain. They all traced their lineage back to Hermes, and beyond him, to Thoth. Manuscripts from this period are deliberately frustrating. Symbols contradict themselves. Instructions loop back on themselves. Processes are hidden behind allegory. This was not incompetence. It was defense. The alchemists understood that literal interpretation by the unprepared could cause harm, mental, physical, and social. So they encoded. A furnace became a womb. A metal became a soul. A process became a pilgrimage. To outsiders, it looked like madness. To insiders, it was filtration. The stone became the obsession. Not because of gold, but because of what gold represented. Completion. Stability. Perfection of form. Texts insisted the stone could heal any illness, perfect any substance, even extend life itself. But they also warned. Those who pursued the stone for power would fail. Those who pursued it for wisdom would only glimpse it. Those who pursued it for balance would change forever. This paradox frustrated generations. Across Europe, records appear that are unsettling in their consistency. Alchemists describe substances that glowed without heat. Liquids that changed color without reaction. Residues that responded to the presence of the experimenter. Some spoke of symbols appearing uncarved. Others of dreams that guided their work. Others of a sense that the process itself was alive. Modern historians dismiss these as metaphor. But metaphor does not repeat this precisely. One of the greatest scientific minds in history spent more time on alchemy than on physics. Isaac Newton. Publicly, he gave the world gravity and motion. Privately, he chased the emerald tablet. Among his personal papers, hidden for centuries, was a handwritten translation of the tablet itself. Newton believed its language encoded laws deeper than mathematics. He did not see contradiction between science and alchemy. He saw continuity. The universe, he believed, was governed by invisible forces. Some could be measured. Others could only be approached indirectly. The tablet, to Newton, was not superstition. It was unfinished science. Newton never completed the great work. Or if he did, he never revealed it. Some believe he failed. Others believe he succeeded and understood the consequences of disclosure. Because by Newton's time, the pattern was clear. Every attempt to force the tablet's knowledge into the open led to instability. Societies fractured. Beliefs polarized. Power consolidated. The knowledge was not dangerous by nature. It was dangerous in context. As modern science rose, alchemy was ridiculed. Universities erased it. Textbooks mocked it. History reframed it as delusion. But suppression does not erase memory. It only pushes it deeper. The emerald tablet vanished once again, not destroyed, but displaced. Its message scattered across architecture, symbolism, philosophy, and ritual. Waiting. This is the moment most people miss. The tablet never disappears randomly. It retreats when civilizations become unbalanced. It resurfaces when they approach another turning point. Egypt. Greece. Alexandria. The Middle Ages. Each emergence aligned with societal upheaval. Which leads to an unavoidable question. Why did the knowledge resurface again in the modern era? In the 20th and 21st centuries, strange things began to happen. Archaeological anomalies. Materials science encountering impossible behaviors. Physics discovering that observation affects reality. Consciousness refusing to remain a side effect. The phrase returned, not from mystics, but from scientists. As above, so below. As within, so without. Different words. Same pattern. Ancient traditions insist that when an age reaches a certain speed, when technology outpaces wisdom, the old knowledge returns. Not as prophecy. As invitation. The emerald tablet does not announce itself. It waits to be recognized. Because in the year 2011, something unprecedented happened. Without warning. Without authorship. Without explanation. A document appeared online claiming to do what no alchemist had ever dared. To reveal the emerald tablet's secret without allegory. Without symbols. Without riddles. And it began with a sentence that shook the modern world. The age of secrets is over. That document was called the Book of Aquarius. And its appearance may signal that humanity is standing at the edge of another cycle. When the ancient world fractured, it did not shatter evenly. Some fragments vanished completely, swallowed by silence. Others survived, distorted by fear, ambition, and misunderstanding. Knowledge, when removed from balance, does not disappear. It mutates. And this is exactly what happened to the teachings that traced their lineage back to Thoth and Hermes when they crossed into medieval Europe. The fall of Alexandria did not end Hermetic knowledge. It changed its environment. Where once scholars debated openly beneath marble columns, now learning retreated into shadows. The world that followed was not hostile to knowledge because it was ignorant. It was hostile because it was unstable. Empires collapsed. Borders shifted. Faith became the glue holding fractured societies together, and anything that threatened that glue was treated as danger. Hermetic teachings were not outlawed because they were false. They were feared because they undermined authority. They suggested that truth could be discovered directly, without intermediaries. They implied that the universe operated according to intelligible laws rather than divine whim. Most dangerously, they hinted that transformation was possible, not only of matter, but of the human being itself. In such a world, wisdom could no longer survive in the open. So it adapted. The Emerald Tablet did not vanish during this period. It slipped beneath the surface of history. Its language became symbolic. Its instructions became allegory. Its practitioners learned to speak in riddles not to confuse, but to protect. Knowledge reorganized itself into layers, accessible only to those willing to dedicate years, or entire lifetimes, to understanding it. This is where modern misunderstanding begins. Alchemy, as it entered medieval Europe, was never intended to be public science. It was a filtration system. A way of ensuring that only minds capable of patience, discipline, and balance could progress. The symbols were not decorative. They were barriers. Anyone seeking quick power would become lost in contradiction. Anyone seeking wealth would drown in metaphor. Only those willing to change themselves before changing the world could move forward. But Europe was no longer an environment of patience. Kings heard rumors of gold. Nobles whispered of elixirs. Courts funded laboratories not to understand the universe, but to dominate it. The Emerald Tablet, once a guide for harmony, became a rumored source of advantage. And this shift, subtle but profound, changed everything. The great work was no longer approached as inner refinement mirrored in matter. It became a race. A competition. A demand for results. The alchemist, once a student of cycles, was pressured to produce miracles on command. And knowledge responded the same way it always does when forced. It resisted. Accounts from this era grow increasingly unstable. Manuscripts describe experiments that defied explanation. Substances that glowed without heat. Liquids that shifted color without chemical reaction. Residues that appeared inert until handled by specific individuals. Modern historians dismiss these as exaggeration, metaphor, or outright fraud. Yet the consistency across regions, languages, and centuries is difficult to ignore. More unsettling are the personal accounts. Alchemists began to describe dreams that guided their work. Symbols appearing unbidden in their minds. A sense that the process itself was observing them. Some wrote of voices, not commanding, but correcting. Others spoke of an internal pressure that increased the closer they came to success. The deeper they pushed, the more unstable their perception became. Hermetic texts warned of this outcome long before it occurred. They stated clearly that the great work mirrors the practitioner. An unbalanced mind produces unbalanced results. A corrupted intention fractures the process itself. The Emerald Tablet, they insisted, does not give power. It reflects readiness. This is why medieval alchemical literature becomes so frustrating to read. Instructions contradict themselves. Processes loop endlessly. Results are promised, then withdrawn. To the uninitiated, it looks like madness. To those who understand the filtration, it is precision. The text reveals only what the reader is capable of seeing. Yet even this safeguard was not enough. As pressure increased, knowledge retreated further. It reorganized again, this time into networks. Small groups formed, bound by shared symbols and silent agreements. Membership was selective. Initiation was slow. Trust was earned through discipline rather than belief. These groups did not advertise themselves, and history rarely records them accurately. Later generations would give them names. Rosicrucians, Templar offshoots, early Masonic traditions. Whether these groups truly possessed complete Hermetic knowledge is still debated. What matters is that they believed they were preserving a lineage. A chain that stretched back through Hermes, through Thoth, and beyond recorded history. They spoke of a lost source. A first teaching. A knowledge so complete it could not be expressed directly without destabilizing society. The Emerald Tablet was treated not as a physical artifact to be displayed, but as a conceptual core encoded into ritual, geometry, and symbolism. Architecture became text. Ceremony became instruction. Silence became language. This is why certain medieval structures feel unsettling even today. Cathedrals whose proportions align with celestial ratios. Symbols carved into stone that repeat patterns found in ancient temples half a world away. Floor plans that mirror diagrams found in alchemical manuscripts. These were not artistic flourishes. They were storage systems. Knowledge preserved in form rather than words. Because words burn. Stone remembers. Still, the obsession did not fade. It intensified. Across Europe, rulers continued to fund secret laboratories. Alchemists were protected one day and imprisoned the next. Success meant favor. Failure meant suspicion. Some vanished. Some recanted. Some went mad. But every generation produced at least one figure who came dangerously close to something real. This is where the story intersects with one of the most misunderstood figures in scientific history. Isaac Newton. To the modern world, Newton is the embodiment of rationality. Laws of motion. Gravity. Calculus. The foundation of classical physics. What textbooks rarely mention is that Newton devoted more time to alchemy than to physics. He wrote millions of words on the subject. He translated Hermetic texts in secret. He filled notebooks with diagrams, symbols, and experimental notes that were never meant for publication. Newton did not see a contradiction between science and alchemy. He saw continuity. He believed the universe was governed by invisible forces. Some could be measured. Others could only be approached indirectly. Gravity itself was once invisible, unknowable, absurd. Why should other forces not exist beyond current understanding? Among Newton's private papers, hidden for centuries, was a handwritten translation of the Emerald Tablet. Not copied mechanically, but studied intensely. He believed its language encoded principles deeper than mathematics. That it described a universe where matter and consciousness were intertwined. Newton never publicly acknowledged this work. He understood the risk. By his time, Europe was already struggling to balance emerging science with rigid authority. To introduce a framework that dissolved the boundary between observer and reality would have been catastrophic. Whether Newton succeeded in the great work remains unknown. Some believe he failed. Others believe he succeeded and recognized the consequences of disclosure. What is clear is that after Newton, the pattern repeated once again. Alchemy was ridiculed. Universities erased it from curricula. Histories reframed it as superstition. The Enlightenment declared victory over mystery. The Emerald Tablet vanished again, not destroyed, but displaced. Its teachings scattered into architecture, symbolism, philosophy, and ritual. Knowledge survived, but fragmented. And yet, suppression never truly erases memory. It only delays its return. As modern science rose, it unknowingly circled back toward ancient insight. Physics discovered that observation affects reality. Biology uncovered patterns of self-organization. Mathematics revealed structures that echoed those described in Hermetic diagrams. Consciousness refused to remain a side effect. The universe began to look less like a machine and more like a system of relationships. The phrase returned, not from mystics, but from laboratories. As above, so below. As within, so without. Different language. Same pattern. Ancient traditions insist that when a civilization reaches a certain speed, when its technological power outpaces its wisdom, the old knowledge resurfaces. Not as prophecy. Not as warning. As invitation. The emerald tablet does not announce itself. It waits. Which makes what happened in the early 21st century impossible to ignore. Because for the first time in recorded history, the knowledge that had been hidden, encoded, and protected for thousands of years did not emerge through temples, secret orders, or initiations. It appeared online. Without warning. Without authorship. Without explanation. A document claiming to do what no alchemist had ever dared. To reveal the secret directly. No allegory. No symbols. No riddles. And it began with a sentence that shattered the pattern of concealment that had defined every previous age. The age of secrets is over. That document was called the Book of Aquarius. And its appearance raises a question that cannot be dismissed. If the emerald tablet only resurfaces when a cycle is turning, what does its modern return say about the world we are living in now? Because if the ancient pattern holds true, then humanity is no longer approaching a threshold. It has already crossed it. And what comes next will determine whether this cycle ends in collapse. Or something entirely different. If the emerald tablet survived floods, empires, suppression, and ridicule. If it waited until science itself began to echo its principles. Then the question is no longer whether it would return. But why it returned now. And in the next part, we will examine the moment ancient knowledge collided with modern consciousness. And why the 21st century may be the most dangerous and decisive phase of the cycle yet. When the Enlightenment announced itself to the world, it did so with confidence bordering on arrogance. Europe declared that it had finally awakened from superstition, that reason had triumphed over myth, and that humanity was stepping into an age of clarity. History books celebrate this period as a clean break from the darkness of the past. But reality is rarely so simple. What the Enlightenment truly represented was not the destruction of mystery, but its reclassification. Mystery was no longer forbidden. It was redefined as irrelevant. Alchemy did not vanish because it was disproven. It vanished because it could not be quantified. Universities demanded repeatability, predictability, and public verification. Hermetic knowledge offered none of these on demand. Its results depended on the internal state of the practitioner, on patience, on alignment. These variables made it incompatible with a system that sought control rather than understanding. So alchemy was quietly removed. Its texts were archived but no longer taught. Its symbols were labeled primitive. Its practitioners were reframed as dreamers who mistook metaphor for mechanism. The world moved forward convinced it had left something childish behind, unaware that it had abandoned a framework capable of explaining what science had not yet encountered. This separation created an illusion of progress. Physics advanced rapidly, but only in directions that ignored consciousness. Chemistry flourished, but stripped of symbolic meaning. Biology catalogued life, but avoided questions of purpose. Knowledge expanded outward, but not inward. The universe became something to be measured, not experienced. And yet, the old patterns did not disappear. They went underground again. Secret societies did not dissolve with the rise of science. They adapted. Some became philanthropic organizations. Others focused on architecture, geometry, or philosophy. The language of transformation was replaced with the language of enlightenment, self-improvement, and moral refinement. The symbols remained. The rituals remained. Only the explanations changed. This was not deception. It was survival. Because even in an age that worshipped reason, certain ideas remained dangerous. The notion that reality responds to observation. That matter and mind are entangled. That the universe may be structured as a living system rather than a machine. These ideas threatened not religion anymore, but the new authority, material certainty. The irony is difficult to ignore. As science rejected Hermeticism, it unknowingly began to rediscover its principles. Electricity revealed invisible forces acting across space. Magnetism demonstrated attraction without contact. Later, quantum physics shattered the assumption that particles existed independently of observation. Experiments showed that outcomes changed depending on whether something was measured. Reality behaved less like solid matter and more like probability. What ancient texts described symbolically, modern instruments began to confirm mathematically. Still, the connection was denied. To acknowledge that ancient knowledge might contain legitimate insight would undermine the narrative of linear progress. It would suggest that humanity had not simply evolved forward, but oscillated, forgetting and rediscovering the same truths in different languages. Institutions resist such implications. They prefer clean timelines and clear superiority. So the Emerald Tablet remained absent from public discourse. But absence does not mean inactivity. Throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, scattered individuals began to notice the cracks. Scientists who strayed too far into metaphysical questions were ridiculed. Psychologists who explored consciousness beyond behavior were marginalized. Philosophers who suggested reality might be participatory rather than objective were dismissed as speculative. Yet their work persisted. Carl Jung encountered alchemy not as chemistry, but as psychology. He recognized the symbols not as instructions for metal, but as maps of transformation within the human psyche. Jung did not claim alchemists were consciously practicing psychology. He suggested something more unsettling, that the same patterns emerge whenever humans attempt to understand transformation, regardless of language. The great work was not outdated. It was incomplete. This realization created a quiet tension beneath modern culture. Technology accelerated faster than wisdom. Systems grew more complex, yet understanding grew more fragmented. Humanity gained unprecedented power over matter without a corresponding understanding of itself. Ancient traditions warned precisely against this imbalance. They described cycles in which civilizations reach a technological peak divorced from inner development. In these cycles, knowledge returns not as gift, but as test. The Emerald Tablet, according to Hermetic logic, does not appear to elevate humanity. It appears to reveal whether humanity is ready. And readiness is never universal. This brings us to a crucial misunderstanding about secrecy. Hermetic knowledge was never hidden to maintain control. It was hidden to prevent collapse. When power arrives before comprehension, destruction follows. History confirms this repeatedly. Weapons precede ethics. Systems precede understanding. Tools outpace wisdom. By the late 20th century, the imbalance had become impossible to ignore. Science could split atoms but not explain consciousness. Medicine could extend life but not define meaning. Technology connected the world but fragmented attention. Humanity stood surrounded by information yet starving for coherence. This is the context in which the cycle shifted again. The internet did not just connect people. It dissolved gatekeeping. Knowledge that once required initiation, permission, or institutional access became available instantly. This included misinformation, speculation, and myth, but also suppressed texts, forgotten manuscripts, and forbidden ideas. The filtration system that protected Hermetic knowledge for millennia collapsed overnight. Anyone could read. Anyone could interpret. Anyone could attempt. Ancient safeguards failed not because they were broken, but because the environment changed. The Emerald Tablet no longer needed temples or societies to survive. It entered a world where secrecy itself was becoming obsolete. And then something unprecedented occurred. A text appeared that did not speak in allegory. It did not use symbols. It did not demand initiation. It did not warn the reader away. It claimed to reveal the great work plainly. This was not how the cycle had ever functioned before. The Book of Aquarius did not present itself as ancient scripture. It offered no lineage, no authority, no appeal to tradition. It spoke in the language of modern readers while referencing processes older than recorded history. It rejected wealth, power, and immortality as goals. Instead, it framed the work as alignment of mind, intention, and matter. Most strikingly, it framed secrecy as no longer necessary. According to the text, humanity had reached a point where concealment created more danger than revelation. That suppression had failed. That ignorance was no longer protective. The only remaining variable was responsibility. This claim alone separates it from every previous manifestation of Hermetic teaching. Critics dismissed it immediately. Scientists mocked it. Alchemists argued over its legitimacy. Forums exploded with speculation. Experiments were attempted. Failures were common. Success, if it occurred at all, was never publicly verified. Which is exactly what the Emerald Tablet would predict. The work does not fail universally. It fails selectively. And this is where the story becomes uncomfortable. Because if the Book of Aquarius is genuine, even partially, then it suggests the cycle has entered its most volatile phase. Knowledge is no longer hidden. The filtration is internal. Responsibility replaces secrecy. Readiness replaces initiation. Humanity is no longer protected from itself. The ancient warning echoes louder here than ever before. The power to transform matter is insignificant compared to the power to transform perception. One without the other leads to catastrophe. And for the first time, the test is not administered by priests, kings, or secret orders. It is administered by the individual. Every reader becomes a participant. Every interpretation carries consequence. Every attempt reflects the state of the one attempting it. The Emerald Tablet was never about producing gold. It was about revealing who should never have it. And now, in an age where information moves faster than wisdom, the question is no longer academic. It is immediate. Because if ancient knowledge has returned openly, if secrecy has been replaced by choice, if the filtration has moved from institutions to individuals, then the cycle has reached its most dangerous configuration yet. And the final phase will not be determined by texts or traditions. It will be determined by us. If the Emerald Tablet has entered the modern world without protection, if the Book of Aquarius removed the final barrier of secrecy, then the question is no longer what the knowledge does, but what kind of minds it will encounter. And in the next part, we will examine the modern anomalies, failed experiments, quiet successes, and psychological consequences that suggest the cycle is no longer theoretical. It is already unfolding around us. For most of human history, distance acted as protection. Dangerous knowledge traveled slowly. Ideas crossed borders over generations, not seconds. Mistakes had time to burn themselves out before reaching critical mass. The modern world erased that buffer. Information no longer migrates. It appears. Fully formed. Everywhere. All at once. This single shift altered the Hermetic cycle more than any empire, religion, or scientific revolution ever did. The Emerald Tablet was never designed for a world without friction. Ancient knowledge assumed delay. It assumed struggle. It assumed time as a filtering mechanism. Even when texts were leaked or stolen, understanding arrived gradually. Misinterpretations collapsed under their own weight before causing widespread damage. The modern world offers no such mercy. A single idea can reach millions before its consequences are understood. This is why the return of Hermetic concepts in the digital age feels unstable. Not because the ideas are new, but because the environment is unprecedented. Online forums filled with attempts to replicate ancient processes. Some were purely theoretical. Others crossed into dangerous obsession. Individuals with no grounding in chemistry, psychology, or self-discipline began experimenting with ideas that once required years of preparation. The filtration system, once external, slow, and deliberate, was gone. What remained was curiosity without containment. Most attempts failed immediately. Some failed spectacularly. A few produced results that were quietly buried beneath ridicule. These outcomes followed a pattern that ancient texts predicted with uncomfortable accuracy. Those driven by impatience experienced confusion. Those driven by greed experienced distortion. Those driven by ego encountered psychological instability. But a small number reported something else. They did not describe gold. They did not describe miracles. They described changes in perception. Time felt different. Patterns became impossible to ignore. Coincidences stacked too precisely to dismiss. Dreams began to influence waking decisions. These reports were inconsistent, scattered, and unverifiable, which made them easy to dismiss. But dismissal does not negate pattern. It only delays recognition. The Emerald Tablet never promised uniform results. It promised correspondence. As above, so below. As within, so without. In a modern context, this principle manifests psychologically before it manifests physically. Consciousness shifts first. Matter follows only when alignment stabilizes. Ancient alchemists understood this implicitly. Modern readers often ignore it entirely. This misunderstanding creates the illusion that the knowledge does not work. In reality, it is working exactly as intended. The modern mind is conditioned for speed. Immediate reward. Clear outcomes. Alchemy offers none of these. It operates on feedback loops too subtle for impatient perception. Those who persist long enough encounter discomfort long before insight. And most retreat at that point. Which again matches the ancient filtration model. What has changed is not the difficulty. It is the scale. For the first time, millions of individuals encountered fragments of the same ancient knowledge simultaneously. This created resonance. Ideas echoed across cultures without coordination. Independent researchers reached similar conclusions using different language. Scientists, psychologists, and philosophers began approaching the same questions from opposite ends. What is consciousness? Does observation alter reality? Is the universe participatory? These questions no longer belong to mysticism. They entered laboratories. Quantum mechanics made the observer unavoidable. Neuroscience struggled to explain subjective experience. Artificial intelligence raised questions about awareness without biology. Reality itself began to look less solid the closer it was examined. Ancient traditions anticipated this convergence. They claimed that when material mastery reaches a certain point, it collapses inward. The external world becomes less mysterious while the internal world becomes unavoidable. At this stage, civilizations face a choice: integrate consciousness into understanding, or fragment under the weight of their own tools. The Emerald Tablet describes this moment as the crossing. Not a collapse. Not an awakening. A threshold. This threshold is never announced. It reveals itself through instability. Systems fail in unexpected ways. Institutions lose credibility. Information overwhelms comprehension. Certainty dissolves. Meaning becomes contested. Individuals feel simultaneously empowered and lost. Modern society fits this description with disturbing precision. Technological miracles coexist with existential anxiety. Knowledge expands while trust collapses. Connectivity increases isolation. Progress accelerates confusion. These are not signs of failure. They are symptoms of transition. Ancient cycles describe this phase as the most dangerous. Because power remains high while wisdom lags behind. This is where the Emerald Tablet re-enters, not as a solution, but as a mirror. It does not offer comfort. It exposes imbalance. It forces confrontation with responsibility. The Book of Aquarius did not introduce new danger. It revealed existing instability, which explains the aggressive reaction it provoked. Institutions ignored it. Experts dismissed it. Communities argued endlessly over its legitimacy. But very few engaged with its core implication. That secrecy had ended not because humanity had become wise, but because continued concealment had become pointless. Once knowledge exists digitally, suppression becomes illusion. Control shifts from access to interpretation. The ancient guardians of knowledge understood this long before the internet. They predicted a time when filtration would move entirely inside the individual. This time is now. The danger is not that people will succeed. The danger is that people will misunderstand what success looks like. Modern culture equates transformation with acquisition. More power. More control. More certainty. Hermetic knowledge moves in the opposite direction. It strips illusions. It destabilizes identity. It forces the practitioner to confront internal contradictions before external change occurs. This is why so many modern attempts collapse into confusion or obsession. The work exposes what the individual is not ready to see. In ancient times, communities absorbed these failures quietly. Today, failure goes viral. Psychological instability becomes content. Misinformation multiplies. The boundary between insight and delusion blurs. This is not accidental. The Emerald Tablet does not fail safely. It was never designed to. It assumes a culture capable of contextualizing transformation. A society that understands restraint. A framework that prioritizes balance over outcome. The modern world provides none of these by default, which makes the current phase uniquely volatile. The question is no longer whether the knowledge is real. The question is whether humanity can encounter it without fracturing. Because once perception changes, it cannot be reversed. Once patterns are seen, they cannot be unseen. Once correspondence is experienced directly, belief becomes irrelevant. This is why ancient texts warned that the work isolates. Not socially, but perceptually. The practitioner no longer experiences reality the same way. Time, causality, and intention begin to behave differently. Without guidance, grounding, or ethical framework, this shift can destabilize identity entirely. Modern psychology is only beginning to recognize this phenomenon. Terms like derealization, depersonalization, and spiritual emergence attempt to categorize what ancient traditions described more holistically. The danger lies not in the experience itself, but in the absence of structure. Ancient alchemists worked within lineage. Modern individuals work alone. This difference changes everything. And yet, despite the risk, the pattern continues. People keep searching. Keep experimenting. Keep encountering fragments of something larger. Which suggests the cycle is not optional. It is systemic. Civilizations do not choose when the threshold appears. They only choose how they respond. The Emerald Tablet does not force transformation. It reveals conditions. It exposes whether humanity is capable of integrating power with responsibility. This integration has never been achieved globally before. Which means the current moment is unprecedented. Not because the knowledge is new, but because the scale is total. Every individual with access to information becomes a node in the system. Every interpretation alters the collective field. Every misunderstanding amplifies instability. Every act of responsibility stabilizes it. The cycle is no longer driven by elites, orders, or institutions. It is distributed. And distributed systems behave differently. They do not collapse from a single failure. They collapse from cumulative imbalance. This brings us to the most uncomfortable implication of all. If the Emerald Tablet has returned openly, if secrecy has ended, if the filtration is internal, then humanity is not waiting for a revelation. It is participating in one. Consciously or not. The cycle is no longer approaching its conclusion. It is already executing it. If ancient knowledge no longer belongs to temples or texts, if the great work has shifted from matter to perception, if the final filtration is psychological rather than institutional, then the last question is unavoidable. What happens when a civilization encounters truth faster than it can integrate it? In the final part, we will examine the closing phase of the cycle. Why timing matters more than knowledge. And whether humanity is approaching collapse or transformation right now. Civilizations rarely recognize the moment they pass the point of no return. History does not announce thresholds with ceremony. There is no signal, no countdown, no universal realization. A civilization continues believing it is stable until stability becomes memory. The Hermetic cycle describes this moment not as catastrophe, but as acceleration. Everything speeds up. Systems intensify. Contradictions sharpen. Reality begins responding faster than comprehension. This is where humanity stands now. The modern world did not suddenly become chaotic. It became exposed. Structures that relied on gradual change were overwhelmed by instantaneous consequence. Decisions echo globally. Actions compound invisibly. Feedback loops tighten. What once took centuries now unfolds in years, sometimes months. This compression of cause and effect is not technological accident. It is structural inevitability. Ancient knowledge predicted it. The Emerald Tablet does not describe apocalypse. It describes convergence. When internal development lags behind external power, reality forces alignment. Not gently. Not gradually. Through pressure. Pressure reveals truth. The current era is defined by pressure everywhere. Political systems strain under complexity they were never designed to handle. Economic models collapse under assumptions of infinite growth. Social structures fracture as identity multiplies faster than coherence. Psychological distress rises alongside technological comfort. These are not isolated crises. They are expressions of a single imbalance. Ancient texts describe this as the final test of a cycle. Not a test of intelligence. Not a test of strength. A test of integration. Can a civilization hold contradictory truths without fragmenting? Can it wield power without losing coherence? Can it expand outward without collapsing inward? Previous cycles failed. Not because knowledge was insufficient, but because wisdom was centralized. When transformation depends on elites, failure scales catastrophically. When knowledge is hoarded, correction arrives too late. The ancient guardians understood this flaw. They preserved knowledge, but they also delayed its release. Until delay became more dangerous than disclosure. This is the paradox of the current moment. The Book of Aquarius did not appear because humanity was ready. It appeared because humanity could no longer be protected from itself. Once global systems reached irreversible complexity, secrecy lost its function. Information suppression became impossible. Knowledge either emerged openly or leaked chaotically. The choice was no longer between revelation and concealment. It was between coherence and fragmentation. Open release was the lesser risk. This reframes the entire narrative. The return of Hermetic knowledge is not an awakening. It is a stabilization attempt. A last-stage corrective mechanism. Ancient systems designed to reintroduce balance when acceleration becomes unsustainable. This is why the knowledge does not arrive with authority. No institution endorses it. No hierarchy enforces it. No doctrine protects it. Because authority would corrupt it. Hierarchy would distort it. Doctrine would freeze it. The only remaining filter is individual responsibility. Which is the most fragile filter of all? The Emerald Tablet assumes something radical, that some individuals will choose restraint without enforcement. That perception can mature faster than appetite. That responsibility can emerge organically. This assumption has never been tested at scale. Until now. Modern humanity is the first civilization to encounter the great work without guardians. Without secrecy. Without enforced initiation. This is not a gift. It is an experiment. And experiments have outcomes. One outcome is collapse. The ancient texts are explicit about this possibility. When power amplifies without alignment, systems destabilize violently. Reality does not negotiate. It corrects. Collapse is not punishment. It is reset. The other outcome is transformation. Not technological. Not political. Perceptual. Transformation does not mean utopia. It means coherence. A civilization capable of holding complexity without self-destructing. A society that integrates inner development with external capability. A culture that understands power as responsibility rather than entitlement. Ancient traditions insist this outcome is rare, but not impossible. The determining factor is not knowledge. It is timing. Knowledge introduced too early creates chaos. Knowledge introduced too late becomes irrelevant. The Emerald Tablet describes a narrow window where disclosure can stabilize rather than destroy. This window opens when external systems reach peak complexity and internal dissatisfaction reaches peak intensity. This describes the present with unsettling accuracy. Humanity is simultaneously powerful and uncertain, confident and anxious, connected and fragmented. These contradictions are not symptoms of failure. They are prerequisites for transformation. Without tension, there is no incentive to change. This is why the current era feels unbearable to so many. The pressure is intentional. Not imposed by fate, but generated by imbalance. Reality is not hostile. It is responsive. It amplifies unresolved contradictions until they can no longer be ignored. The Emerald Tablet describes this process impersonally. It does not moralize. It observes. As above, so below. As within, so without. When internal coherence collapses, external systems follow. When perception fragments, institutions fracture. When responsibility dissolves, power becomes destructive. The modern world displays all three simultaneously. Which means the cycle is not approaching its end. It is executing its decision phase. The most dangerous misconception is that this decision belongs to leaders, governments, or institutions. Those structures are downstream. They reflect collective perception. They do not originate it. The Hermetic framework places responsibility at the smallest unit, the individual. This is deeply uncomfortable. It removes the illusion of spectatorship. There is no neutral position. No passive observer. Every interpretation contributes. Every reaction feeds the system. Every act of responsibility stabilizes it. Every act of denial accelerates instability. This is why ancient texts insist the great work begins internally. Not metaphorically. Mechanistically. Perception shapes behavior. Behavior shapes systems. Systems shape reality. Change perception, and the cascade alters direction. Ignore perception, and collapse becomes inevitable. The modern world resists this idea fiercely. It prefers external solutions to internal problems. New technologies. New policies. New systems. But every solution that ignores perception recreates the same imbalance at higher complexity. This is why cycles repeat. The Emerald Tablet does not offer salvation. It offers a map. A description of how reality responds to alignment and misalignment. It does not guarantee survival. It explains consequence. The Book of Aquarius made one final claim that most readers overlooked. That the work is no longer optional. Not because someone demands participation, but because the environment enforces it. In a hyperconnected world, individual states of consciousness propagate rapidly. Anxiety spreads. Stability spreads. Misinformation spreads. Clarity spreads. The collective field becomes sensitive to internal states. This sensitivity is new. Previous civilizations could fragment locally. Collapse was regional. Today, fragmentation propagates globally. So does coherence. This amplifies both risk and opportunity. The cycle has never operated under these conditions. Which means historical precedent ends here. There is no script beyond this point. Only principles. And the primary principle is alignment. Alignment between intention and action. Between power and restraint. Between knowledge and responsibility. Between perception and reality. Without alignment, acceleration leads to collapse. With alignment, acceleration leads to transformation. The Emerald Tablet does not predict which outcome will occur. It explains how either becomes inevitable. This is why the final stage feels silent. No prophecy. No declaration. No revelation event. Just pressure. Pressure that forces choice. Most individuals will never read Hermetic texts. They will never attempt alchemy. They will never encounter the emerald tablet directly. That does not exempt them. The cycle does not require awareness. It operates through behavior, through reaction, through participation in systems shaped by collective perception. This is why the final filtration is subtle. It does not ask what you believe. It observes how you respond. To uncertainty. To power. To responsibility. The work is no longer hidden in texts. It is embedded in daily life. How people consume information. How they wield influence. How they treat uncertainty. How they respond to complexity. These behaviors determine outcome more than any ancient instruction ever could. This is the quiet truth beneath the mythology. The emerald tablet was never about producing gold. Gold was distraction. Immortality was bait. Power was misdirection. The real work was always about coherence. A mind capable of holding contradiction without collapse. A society capable of wielding power without corruption. A civilization capable of perceiving reality without fragmenting under it. This capacity has never been tested at scale. Until now. Which means the cycle does not end with revelation. It ends with consequence. Not someday. Not symbolically. But continuously. Every choice compounds. The threshold has already been crossed. The only question remaining is direction. If the emerald tablet never promised salvation. If the great work was always internal. If the cycle now operates without guardians or secrecy. Then the most unsettling possibility is this. Humanity is not waiting for the future. It is actively creating it, through perception itself. And the cycle will not ask whether we are ready. It will simply reflect what we have become. What ancient traditions warned was never meant to be comforting. It was meant to be accurate. The final phase of a cycle is not marked by collapse alone, but by choice. When a civilization reaches the point where knowledge is no longer scarce, power is no longer centralized, and information is no longer containable, the old safeguards cease to function. The responsibility once held by initiates, guardians, and lineages dissolves into the collective. At this stage, the world no longer tests belief. It tests behavior. This is why the modern age feels unstable rather than enlightened. Humanity has acquired the tools of gods without inheriting the discipline of sages. Technology amplifies intention instantly, but intention itself remains unexamined. The emerald tablet describes this condition precisely, not as evil, not as failure, but as imbalance. When internal development lags behind external capability, reality responds with pressure until alignment is forced. Pressure is not punishment. It is correction. The ancient cycles did not end because civilizations lacked intelligence. They ended because intelligence was mistaken for wisdom. The same mistake is unfolding again, but on a scale never seen before. In earlier ages, collapse was regional. Knowledge was lost locally. Memory survived elsewhere. Today, the system is global. A fracture anywhere propagates everywhere. There is no external refuge left for the cycle to reset quietly. Which means this time, the outcome matters. The Hermetic tradition never promised salvation. It described consequence. If perception remains fragmented, systems will continue to destabilize until complexity becomes unmanageable. If responsibility is avoided, power will turn inward and consume the structures built to wield it. But if enough individuals integrate understanding with restraint, if perception matures alongside capability, the cycle does not need to end in erasure. It can transform. Transformation does not mean perfection. It means coherence. A civilization that understands the cost of its tools. A society that recognizes that observation alters reality, not symbolically, but mechanically. A culture capable of holding contradiction without turning it into conflict. This is the great work applied not to matter, but to civilization itself. And this is why the Emerald Tablet has returned openly. Not because humanity has earned it, but because humanity has reached a point where delay is no longer possible. The cycle will not wait for consensus. It will not pause for belief. It will not announce its verdict. It will simply reflect what humanity chooses, moment by moment, action by action, perception by perception. The work is no longer hidden in symbols or stone. It is embedded in how information is used, how power is exercised, and how uncertainty is faced. The final truth of the Emerald Tablet is not written. It is lived. And the threshold humanity stands upon is not ahead in the future. It is beneath our feet. Already crossed.